I work for the FAA. I'm one of the people who works behind a desk all day, so the front line can focus 100% on doing their jobs. Ultimately, everything we're doing is trying to make sure that when people go up, they all come down in one piece. It's hard to have that sense of purpose when everything that I work for is under attack. Over 100 probationary employees in the FAA were terminated, including people who were directly supporting the front line. It was pretty indiscriminate. Overall, we've lost about 2,200 FAA employees through termination and deferred resignation who have decades of experience with the agency. Our air traffic controllers are already understaffed and overworked. They don't have the hours in the day to pick up any tasks outside of keeping the planes coming in and going out. They rely on support staff to make sure that they have all the technology and all the communications that they need to get the job done. Even though the air traffic controllers and the aviation safety inspectors weren't allowed to take the deferred resignation, a lot of the people that support them ended up doing so. At Newark Airport recently, there were some serious breakdowns in equipment. Our aviation safety infrastructure was built decades ago. A lot of it is in need of replacement, and it just hasn't happened. Instead, the support team, who are already understaffed, are making do with resources that aren't really state-of-the-art. Employees are scared, employees are confused, employees are angry. I'm getting a little emotional. You know, we say at the FAA that our rules are written in blood. And what that means is every rule that we have to regulate air traffic control and pilots, every single one of those was created because there was a disaster and people died. We have people coming in to FAA now saying they know a better way to do it when they don't even know why FAA does things the way it does. The rules are not written in crayon for people to come in and try to haphazardly change things without recognizing that when things were done a different way, people died. It's so difficult to see people who really do want to do the job well put into these awful situations where they're forced to choose between protecting the public or protecting their jobs. That's not something we should have to choose between. When you see leadership cutting corners instead of doing their due diligence, firing people indiscriminately, no matter how mission critical they are. You know, I think if you asked me today if I would feel safe getting on a plane in this country, I would say yes. You know, maybe I'm an optimist, but I believe in our frontline staff, and they work so hard to make this one of the safest places in the world to fly on an airplane. But, you know, ask me that question again in 6 months, and I might give you a different answer, where we lose mission-critical staff, critical maintenance is going to not get done, and critical systems could fail. It's so hard to believe that we're going to need another tragedy in which lives are lost to prove again that we need to hire the people we need. But somehow it looks like that's what it's going to take. And unfortunately, at the rate things are going, that kind of tragedy might happen again sooner rather than later.
I am an industrial hygienist at NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. We keep workers safe. Anyone from factory work to firefighters to school teachers to healthcare professionals, any employee in the country can request an evaluation from NIOSH if they have a health concern or a safety concern in their workplace. When DOGE started getting involved, I got really nervous. So I'm driving and it's on a Tuesday. And the guard comes out to greet me at the scanner where we badge in. And she was like, "Do you need a hug?" And I was like, "Oh God, what happened?" And she was like, "Go inside." And so I went in, and it's just chaos. And we found out that at 5:30 that morning, all of our supervisors had been fired. Maybe it's naive of me, but I thought at least our program, the Health Hazard Evaluation Program, would be safe because it's actually part of the congressional mandate that created NIOSH and OSHA in the first place. So not having it is not legal. The impact of this is going to be so detrimental to the American worker. NIOSH houses so many programs. We have the firefighter fatality investigation team and the mining branch who performs black lung screening for free. We've gone to meat processing plants, looking at ergonomic issues, like to see if there are problems with repetitive motion causing injury. We do a lot of work with construction. Silica dust is a common one for that. We'll look at noise exposure. If you've ever seen an N95, it has a NIOSH stamp on it because we have tested that respirator and said, yeah, it filters out exactly what it says it does. They're trying to bring more factory work back to the United States. And if you're removing the people who can help you set that up in a safe way, you're going to end up with a lot of really sick people. By getting rid of NIOSH, you're looking at a huge increase in healthcare costs, in healthcare burden on the country. I think somebody calculated it out, and to fund NIOSH for an entire year, it costs $2.20 per worker per year. And I think that's a bargain. And without NIOSH, I really think that people are going to die.
I work for Veterans Health Administration, or VHA. We provide care for millions of veterans. I worked in an outpatient clinic for over 15 years. The services that we provide are so critical. It is critical for the veterans to receive care through providers that are trained to work with people who went through military experiences and traumas. Providers who are trained to recognize signs of distress and address it in a timely manner. At least several times a day, I do the suicide screening, knowing that I can improve someone's quality of life. Someone who's struggling is giving me a purpose. The veterans who sacrifice their physical health, their mental health, they should be getting the best services from the country they sacrifice for. Here at the VA, our veterans are not worried about payments and they can receive the care they are looking for. If I compare what veterans talk about right now versus a year ago, I would say the number of concerns that they expressed has drastically increased. They talk about keeping their health care. They're worried about whether or not we are going to exist as a VA. Some served overseas and they're worried about how we're making enemies. Anxiety levels are high. Mental health services are overwhelmed right now. I had a patient who had to use the suicide hotline, and then he said, they helped me so much. And now he read somewhere that they're reducing the staff, and he's like, what it's going to be like if I won't be able to get a hold of them. After January 20th, we received an email that just said that you're supposed to provide 5 accomplishments that you have done within the past week. I remember exactly how flabbergasted we all were, our entire staff. That really stressed me out because I just don't have time to send these emails. We're supposed to be focused on our veterans. That's my mission. I am someone who grew up in a communist country, and I'm seeing the signs here that reminds me of those experiences. At work, I see that people whisper more. I also see people who are reporting and are encouraged to report on other people. Why are we encouraging such culture where people are afraid? I feel like me from the past and me now merged together. It's shockingly reminding me of where I'm from. It's not about politics anymore. It's about the health of our society, and we're sick right now. We need to make sure this illness is addressed so we can grow and be better.
I work for the Internal Revenue Service. We are the tax collector for the federal government. I know that the IRS is one of the most hated parts of federal government, and I completely understand that. But we need taxes in a civilized society in order to create the general pot of funding that can be spent to provide services for the general population. Taxes make sure that we are a protected country and we are safe. Taxes help fund education, food safety, and in that regard, everybody should pay their fair share. Small businesses, large multinational corporations. It is not a joy to pay taxes, but there are millions of federal workers trying to provide the things that you need. We're basically the waiters at your catered party. Then in the background, we are delivering all of these things for the general population. The IRS also ensures fairness and tax compliance. The Inflation Reduction Act provided the IRS with continuous funding of $80 billion for 10 years, because in order to ensure that fairness of compliance, to deal with these complex high-income international agencies or billionaire individuals, we have to have the funding and the technical staff, the lawyers that know what they're doing on these large cases. Since January of this year, that funding was cut by this administration. It is easier now for high-income, high-wealth, multinational corporations to cheat the tax law. It sends a huge signal that it's going to be okay to not have to pay your taxes. The stated mission of DOGE has been to cut fraud, waste, and abuse, and that has absolutely not been happening since January of this year. And if DOGE really wanted to create efficiency, they would have followed every single standard business leadership book that says you come in and you figure out the lay of the land first, and then you make data-driven decisions. What do you think needs fixing? We have ideas, but that's not really the point of DOGE. This year, the IRS has seen more changes in our leadership than ever before. I think we've seen 4 different commissioners. Any kind of IRS modernization programs have been stopped. We've seen the firing and rehiring and firing again of thousands of employees. It signals to the employees that there's no stability, that there's no correct direction. It's 100% detracting from the actual mission of the IRS, the filing season. The IRS is not perfect, but when I took this job, I took an oath, and that oath lives in my heart to defend this country from enemies inside and abroad, and to try to make government work better and more effectively for people in this country. Instead, the door has been opened to greater abuse of the government systems. Why is this happening in the country that is supposed to be the leader of democracy?
On January 20th, Trump's first day of being president, he signed an executive order called Ending Radical and Wasteful Government DEI Programs and Preferencing. And when it came out that DEI was being attacked, we still thought that we were safe because we oversaw all of the disability work at the CDC, and disability has always been bipartisan. My office at the CDC works on programs, research, anything that we can do to ensure that the population of Americans who have disabilities are not experiencing overdependency and non-productivity. So by taking preventative measures, we're able to save the U.S. economy billions of dollars in unnecessary expenses. Our data is covering the broadest population possible in order to capture the bigger picture of disability as a demographic. And what we're trying to do now is recognize that disability does not equate to poor health. One of the most frustrating things is that the words diversity, equity, inclusion, they are all necessary words for us to use. Even the word bias, which has become, one of those dirty words, you have to use the word bias in research because you have to acknowledge bias and account for it through statistical analysis. You can't have disability without diversity because there are so many different types of disabilities, and you get into intersectionality, which is also a word that we're not supposed to use anymore. But all that means is that somebody with a disability is also Black, is also an immigrant. We're trying to make sure that care is equitable because equity is efficient. In January or February, they ordered everyone to come back to the office. A lot of people who worked in disability at the CDC are disabled and depended on telework agreements. That entire office that was dealing with reasonable accommodations was fired. With the Americans with Disabilities Act, you had protections to fight back. You had people who are on your side, and now those people are fired. We're just gonna go back decades. One of the first signs that I saw that we were in trouble was when some people in Tesla outfits walked out of someone's office and said, "We just did updates to your computer." And I went up to her later and I said, "There's nothing wrong with your computer, is there?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Should I report this?" And she said, "I'm not sure yet because we're not sure who to trust anymore." The next day, many more people were added to the DEI watch list. And it included many people that I worked with. The list included the names and pictures of anyone who they deemed as being too diverse or too equitable or too inclusive. They mostly just included the Black people. And now, whenever we're at work, it feels like we're being watched. I came to the CDC with so much passion. My job is about the populations that I want to serve and protect. It's about the dedication that I have to the CDC mission and to the oath that federal workers take. That's supposed to be bipartisan. It's supposed to be unbiased. I never wanted to be involved in any kind of media or anything. I just wanted to do science.
I work for the Social Security Administration, and I've worked there for almost 10 years now. Social Security as an agency is very large, and it provides several well-known benefits. One primary component is the disability program. The purpose of the program is to provide for people who, usually through no fault of their own, are not able to work and support themselves anymore. I work for a part of the department that provides a written explanation why you do or do not meet the criteria for disability. So DOGE's approach to improving efficiency at the agency has definitely not worked. There's just no attempt to engage in the complexity of how government works. The systems that we use to do our work are less reliable as the IT staff has been removed or replaced. Where people have been feeling the effects so far is in the wait times for both the telephone line and the field offices, and the website has crashed. It takes several years of doing this work before you have a really solid understanding of how to do this job effectively. And it is going to take a long time to recover the personnel that we have lost and the experience that we have lost. The data that Social Security collects is incredibly sensitive data. And that includes everywhere that you have ever worked, how much that you've made, people who apply for disability. That includes all of the medical records that you supply in support of your application. So we have this data on the whole country, and we've created all of these procedures to make sure that the public can trust that we're not doing something sketchy with it. There are all of these different security protocols in place, and it is comprehensive. I can't look at my own data in the agency databases because that would be an improper access of data. When DOGE came to the agency, they were not following all of these protocols. DOGE essentially expected to get the same free rein in systems that you might be able to get at a private company if you had high enough access. There have been quite a lot of allegations of fraud and abuse. The suggestion was that there are all of these dead people on the Social Security rolls, and that's why Social Security is struggling. That is just not true. And we know it's not true because the Social Security Administration has a very zealous, very effective Inspector General's office. And their job is finding abuse of the programs, and they're very, very good at their jobs. It is incredibly ironic that you come into an agency saying that you want to identify fraud, waste, and abuse, and then you terminate the person who is in charge of looking for those things.
Since the Trump administration has arrived, it's just a daily attack of unpredictability. Literally nobody could give us answers. I work for the EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency's been charged by Congress to protect the environment. That includes our air, that includes our land, that includes our water. We're supposed to make sure that our citizens, our people, are safe from deadly contaminants. I spent about 6 years in the military, and I got out to go back to school. I realized I wanted to get into environmental science. I'm in the water division. Our job is to make sure that public drinking water is safe. It's just such a vulnerable resource that we take for granted every day. And, our role at the EPA is to make sure that we can maintain that vulnerable resource to make sure that water's clean and prevents us from getting sick. There's a lot of this scrutiny over wasting taxpayer dollars, but in reality, we're doing everything we can to make sure that money is being appropriately spent on things that matter. There are 90 different contaminants that the Safe Drinking Water Act regulates, like forever chemicals, because they don't degrade and they don't wash away. The Midwest, nitrates are a big one. From agricultural practices, there's a lot of manganese and copper mines that leach into the different rivers and streams and, end up making it to our water system and contaminating the water, so that has to be treated. They're slashing government funding, firing career employees. Why are we cutting all these employees? No one can give us answers. Our water, our air, our land are protected by people, and it doesn't magically happen that these programs exist and people are healthy. The environmental justice employees are the ones that are protecting our most vulnerable populations, and they're going to be let go because of Trump's DEI agenda. Environmental justice isn't a buzzword that's meant for political advantage. In wealthy, affluent neighborhoods, you don't find, garbage dumps. You don't find factories. You don't find cancer alleys. Environmental justice is a science. We're making sure that these polluting industries don't get away with it scot-free. You create this excess of knowledge, there's not going to be these scientists to protect the people from deadly contaminants. People forget that federal workers are also taxpayers, and I can assure you and everyone else that as taxpayers, we don't want what they're doing. DOGE is harming the public. It's harming the taxpayers. The real profound impacts aren't going to be within his presidency. It's going to be everything that happens in the future, and we might not even realize it's happening when it does. That's what's keeping me up at night.
When the administration came in, they literally co-opted the U.S. digital services and fired a lot of people. And they're like, this is now called DOGE. That is when I personally began to feel the effects of DOGE sort of being in my life as a Fed. I work for a operational division under Health and Human Services that administers healthcare.gov. We make sure that each plan that is sold on healthcare.gov meets our thresholds that were established in the Affordable Care Act. There are no junk plans. There are standards in place for the plans that are sold on this exchange. Things that I think a lot of people like, such as allowing your dependents to be on your plan until they are 26 years old, not allowing insurance companies to deny you coverage because of a pre-existing condition, those sort of protections that I think Americans are accustomed to, but really could be taken away at any moment. I work with a group whose job is to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse, particularly around companies in the marketplace who may be fraudulently enrolling consumers or selling plans that aren't really plans. And we lost a third of our staff and won't be able to hire anymore. If we really wanted to be rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse, I would not be cutting the staff of divisions whose sole job is to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. We lost, in my department, about 200 probationary employees. Most of them were really young folks just getting their start in their government careers. Many of them were in the Presidential Management Fellow Program, which was designed to bring private sector talent into the government. It has since been eliminated. I remember when the executive order for DEI first came through, and then came the requests for the scrubbing. We were instructed to scrub the words minority, minority-owned, diversity, gender-affirming care, trans, bisexual from the healthcare.gov website. The list was very long. My favorite one was woman and woman-owned. I really just couldn't believe that this was happening. I'm like, what do you mean we can't say women? I have girls too, and do I want to try to explain to them that America doesn't identify the unique concerns and health needs of women? That has also been incredibly disheartening. People think that feds just kind of like clock in, clock out. We literally stood up an entire insurance marketplace from scratch with just like grit and determination. People in the private sector, if they did a startup with this, they would all be multimillionaires by now. And I can tell you that none of us are living in that manner. I could work for a health insurance company. I could work for a tech company. Like, I really have skills that could make me a ton more money in the private sector. But it's just not who I am. I am a public servant.
I work for the National Park Service. A lot of people just assume park rangers just wander around in the woods. This agency protects nature and wildlife, land and history. People call park rangers American storytellers. We always say you can't protect something until you know about it. You can't save something until you understand it. On February 14th, thousands of park rangers got illegally fired for literally no reason. These are people that got extensive background checks, that worked really hard to get into these positions, and thousands of people got fired out of nowhere. And these are people that have been with us for like 20, 30 years. This is on the heels of the fork in the road email. It basically was saying you can get this buyout. So many rangers ended up taking the fork in the road. I don't blame them, but a lot of us chose to stay and hold the line. Why would you want your best performers to be terrified to lose their job every day? With the parks that I'm at, we're an urban park, so we connect a lot with the city. We bring local schools and kids to the park to learn about history, to learn about nature. It's really a beautiful experience. These kids were like, this is the first time I've ever seen a horse in real life. This is the first time I've ever been on a boat. This is the first time I've ever touched the American flag. These kids never have even seen the water, and we live right on the water. And all of that has been taken away because this administration is considering everything quote unquote DEI. A lot has changed since January 20th. They keep calling them federal lands, but it's play on words. They're public lands because they're for the public. America has a lot of amazing natural resources. I'm going to be kind of cheesy for a second, but from sea to shining sea, from Alaska to Hawaii, the Virgin Islands, she's beautiful. People will be like, oh, I'm going to go to the beach, but a lot of beaches are protected by the National Park Service so that resorts don't build on them. Taxpayer dollars go to protecting these lands, and the federal government is trying to sell these lands off to the highest bidder, but we're not here to make a profit. We're here to serve the public. And Doug Burgum, he is the Secretary of the Interior. He said that some of the parks that were along the border are no longer national parks, technically. They are now under the military. There's going to be a lot different this summer at national parks. I know a lot of visitors will get too close to wildlife, and a really big role that park rangers play is called hazing bears. We make sure the bears don't get too comfortable with humans, and so there's going to be a lot more deaths of either people or bears, and you could fall and hurt yourself, and you need somebody to help you, but oh no, those people are fired. Or maybe there's a storm, trees fall over. Well, the trees don't magically get out of the road or off of the trail. Why isn't anybody cleaning this up? When you plan a trip, maybe pack toilet paper, pack first aid kits. That's what it's going to end up becoming at the National Park Service. It's going to be visit at your own risk.
I work for the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, and the FAA has one mission: to keep the public safe in the field of aviation. I think for a long time, FAA staff considered themselves relatively protected from a lot of the politics that goes on in Washington, D.C., that no matter what, we need to keep the planes from crashing. And I think that sense of stability is gone. At the end of January, an Army helicopter and commercial airliner crashed right outside DCA Airport in Washington, D.C. And this was huge inside FAA. The United States had not had a fatality on a commercial airliner in, I believe, 16 years. So this was a generational tragedy, right? Pretty shortly after the collision, President Trump announced that he thought that the collision was caused by diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, the investigation hadn't even started. For the president to step in and try to score some political points about diversity, equity, and inclusion when we just had a major tragedy, it certainly didn't show a commitment to the FAA mission. You know, Secretary Duffy had a big press conference announcing a program to upgrade aviation infrastructure across the country and to hire more air traffic controllers. Let's be honest, air traffic controllers have gotten a lot of promises over a lot of years that haven't gone very far. So on the one hand, we have leadership making all these statements after the collision at DCA, but on the other hand, we have termination of probationary employees, secretive SpaceX deals going on. Everything that's been going on has been very alienating. This has been one of the most difficult times in my life. Yet when I go to talk about it to other people, they don't want to talk about it because it's too political. It's a really hard thing to hear because your next airplane flight's going to be less safe because of this. That's not political. I'm not sitting here telling you who to vote for in the next election or anything like that. I'm just talking about the safety of the American public.
I started at the FDA 12 years ago. The FDA is part of the Health and Human Services Department and is a regulatory agency that regulates drugs, medical devices, food, tobacco, and veterinary medicine. These are things that touch every American every day, and we just assume it's going to be safe, but there are so many ways in which it might not be safe. I don't think we were prepared for the extent to which this would be different. We were told no press, no updates to the website. Even the simplest web changes had to go through clearance all the way to HHS. The idea that they controlled the communications that was so integral to how we communicate with our consumers, that was the beginning. For me, that was just, I don't even know how to describe what an assault it felt like. When we learn about a safety issue with food or drugs or devices or anything else that the FDA regulates, communicating about it in a timely way is critical. If the FDA can't communicate about a safety issue, who would they rely on to do so? We are the source of information to consumers and stakeholders about issues that come up with food and other FDA regulated products. The amount that we have to communicate is mind-boggling. And if these communications are not available, then I think the danger is that people won't know what to trust.
I work for the IRS. It is ingrained in us as an IRS worker that you have to protect the information that you have access to. If you do try and attempt to get information that you're not supposed to have access to, you will be fired. This year, we've seen that completely change. Since January, we've seen unappointed employees coming from the Department of Government Efficiency into the IRS demanding to have access to sensitive systems and taxpayer data. DOGE is meeting with our information technology team to try to figure out how to share data across government agencies. That has not been done before. For example, we have non-citizens who work in this country and pay taxes as well. But there has never been a sharing of taxpayer information between the IRS and the Department of Homeland Security until now. And the fear about that firewall being broken, the fear about the sharing of that data, is because the administration is using DHS as their own police department, and they have these views of what that police department should do. It is hard to see because it is a thing in a cloud, but it is basically a technology overtake. The fact that the data is now being shared is terrifying. The IRS does share data with other agencies for specific purposes that have been specifically agreed upon. For example, the IRS worked with the Department of Education, so somebody seeking a student loan can come in and say, I agree, I want the IRS to provide this information about my income, but Congress has not passed a law telling the federal government, take this taxpayer data that's on all the federal forms and use it to do whatever. Congress has not passed a law. This is all coming from one political figure. So we have zero idea right now how they're going to use your information. Congress doesn't even know. We know nowadays that data is gold. And so if they have access to how much money is somebody making, where does somebody live, can we ruin your business? Will it be used to figure out if anybody's ever contributed to any kind of organization that supports Palestine? Is it collecting data to be able to ruin other people? Is it using data to be able to make more millions of dollars? You've got contractors like Palantir coming in, and you've got Microsoft and all of these tech guys who were standing at the inauguration together, working together with federal agencies on your data, on your information. And I have not read enough sci-fi novels to see or to understand what's coming or what's happening. I'm trying to piece together how the IRS is going to shift away from tax compliance and the fairness aspect into using the IRS criminal investigation officers as police officers. We don't think that the people that were elected are now the people that they warned us about. We can't comprehend that our data is going to be used in malicious ways by the federal government. So now, who's the bad guys? And we just don't know. But what we're seeing is this administration is testing everything, including laws. Hey, can we get away with this? I would bet that in the long term, what we will see is that government will have to repair the damage that is being done by DOGE. I can't even fathom how much repair is going to have to happen. The building back of a government that people would trust or rely on in times of need is just being eroded completely. And the only test that we have are people standing up and saying, this is not what we've signed up for. This is not the direction that we want to send our country in. So this administration, they're going to keep going forward until people stand up and say stop.
Being a federal employee right now is being in the middle of chaos. I think a lot of us are driven by an urge to provide benefits to the American people, but all federal employees right now are under attack. And the work we do and the services we provide for the public are also under attack. At the Department of Transportation, I work on a variety of transportation programs and projects. I've had programs start, and go on hold indefinitely because they didn't align 100% with the ideological views of this administration. Some of the impacts of these delays will be bridges not being built or safety projects that are slated to reduce fatalities not being constructed. I actually watched the Secretary's testimony in Congress today. He was questioned about why projects have not moved into construction yet, and he implied that staffing cuts would have no impact, and I think it's an outright lie to say that that's not going to have an impact on the public. It's holding up authorized funding that Congress invested to help improve our infrastructure. I think the ripple effects of that are going to be really hard to unwind. As a trans person, there's that added level of personal attack. We're all absorbing messages every day that are intentionally designed to demonize and demoralize us. I worry about using the bathroom. Technically, it's illegal every time I walk into a public bathroom at work. This administration implied that we are committing material fraud simply by existing and targeted us as disloyal and dishonest. I worried about my background check and whether that's going to go through, given that I'm not using my sex assigned at birth. I believe I make our government better. I believe there's a place for trans folks in our society, and I think our society has to stand up and advocate for us.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is the foremost public health agency in the United States. The main thing my division was trying to do is eliminate viral hepatitis. In the United States, about 2.4 to 4 million people are infected with hepatitis C right now. There is not a vaccine for hepatitis C, but there is a cure. And the World Health Organization has a goal of eliminating hepatitis C by 2030. With all the things that have happened at the CDC, we're getting farther and farther away from that goal. A lot of people don't know they have hepatitis C. You will go decades without symptoms, and then suddenly your liver is failing and you will die without a transplant. But with this cure, you can avoid having any symptoms whatsoever. I knew in the lead up to the 2024 election that DOGE was going to be a thing, but I don't think it really sunk in that that could affect me. And then I received the email that said I was terminated for performance reasons. I had just gotten promoted and I was set to get a performance bonus because I did so well. And yet I was fired for performance reasons. After you get fired, within a day, they lock you out of your work computer. So that means that all of your documentation, your ability to look at your pay stub, your ability to get your healthcare information, health insurance, all of that gets locked out. So there's this huge panic for weeks. What information do I need? What documents do I need to download and send to a personal computer or my phone or what? The lawyers who were trying to give us advice and help us and do class action lawsuits, they're like, this has never happened before. No one has mass fired probationary employees for, and I'm using air quotes here, performance reasons, which was ironic because almost everyone I know had just gotten promoted. Tons of people are panicking. They just moved for this job. They started a family. I've been on indefinite paid admin leave. I'm technically still employed, but I've been locked out of my computer the whole time and unable to work. It's weird to me that DOGE and the decisions that have been made in the sake of efficiency are essentially having me just sit here and do nothing while my job is going undone. With the firing of a lot of people in my division, what should be a 6-person team handling 5 different diseases is now just 1 person. There's a very, very real risk that people with these diseases will go unnoticed and untreated, and it will eventually kill them. So what terrifies me is if the CDC no longer funds this work, there is no one in the United States looking and testing for hepatitis C. It's already an epidemic. It can only get significantly worse. If you wanted to increase the efficiency of the government, there's hundreds of thousands of things that you could do. The very last thing you would do is fire people, because there are folks at the CDC and all over the federal government who have been in their jobs for decades. You cannot replace them with AI. You cannot replace the number one expert on earth with anyone else. If we stop doing that work, if we stop preventing people from getting sick, the cost monetarily is humongous. As we've seen with measles especially, it would have cost in Texas $68,000 to vaccinate all of the kids who end up getting infected. It now costs in the millions of dollars to treat them for measles, and some of them will die. That is an untold amount of human suffering. You can imagine, the cost in millions and billions of lost economic productivity, of whole industries just not being able to find people to work. That's the whole point of the CDC, is looking out for the whole nation's health. And if no one is doing that, you are at risk. One of the big things that I've seen in the media is that for a lot of folks, the federal government is kind of just a bunch of people pushing papers around. But I really want to emphasize the people who have been fired were protecting you from diseases that I'm glad you don't know about. It is a better America if you don't have to worry about those things.
So the Trump administration and DOGE have most definitely targeted the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. NOAA is most known for a national weather service that does weather and hurricane forecasting and tracking. My part of the agency is focused on the management of marine and coastal resources, giving communities in coastal areas information about how to keep their people safe, keep their property safe. We do research to inform communities about where to build, where to put their critical services like hospitals or schools. The Bureau, in particular the Coastal and Marine Management, helps make informed decisions about how to best manage the resources that everybody can benefit from, so that there'll be resources there for our children in the future. I presently do still have a job with NOAA. We're all waiting to learn the fate of our individual positions, as well as our agency and our programs. They rapidly shut down pretty much every avenue to execute our work, including terminating our probationary employees. A number of projects have simply been eliminated. Research on marine mammal issues, or sea level rise, or erosion, or flooding, those programs probably won't be available anymore, as they locked us down and eliminated our ability to do our jobs. A lot of it turned into reporting on crisis management, documenting the destruction of our programs, of our own projects, of our agency, essentially. It's been fascinating for me as a student of human nature to see the people who have accepted it, and then you have the other folks who are sort of in some kind of denial. But you try to be supportive of your friends and your colleagues. You've given it your career, and to have someone come in one day and say, hey, you're not valued, your work is not useful, it's vague, it's radical, it's liberal, or whatever it is, and then just take everything away from you and boot you out the door, it's insulting. I am a scientist myself. Science brings to the table in law and policy making an informed and objective rationale for making decisions. Science is dangerous because science is truth, and science provides factual information, and it also is democratic because it highlights the impacts to everyone and not just the chosen few. We have a variety of different groups in the Bureau that do research on climate change. NOAA has been a leader internationally on climatological research. Our work models and measures and predicts and forecasts natural hazard events so communities and individuals can understand what their own risk is. It impacts farmers, it impacts people who live in cities who get hot, and it impacts aquaculture, and it impacts people who want water and need water in the West. NOAA is a science agency, and the scope of data that's created in the agency is massive. And who will safeguard that data for the future? Nobody will. It will be unprotected, and it will be susceptible to loss, for sure. This administration is very well known for getting rid of evidence and lying about things and pretending that one thing is reality when we all know it's actually not. I have every reason to believe that this administration will destroy as much as they can, as quickly as they can, to make sure that it doesn't see the light of day. If you get rid of all of the infrastructure and the science and all of the people who have dedicated their lives to trying to help the nation negotiate some very complex problems, those problems are going to be much worse. And you're setting this nation up for just disaster, really.
I work for the FAA, which also regulates commercial space launches. When a private business sends a commercial space launch up, we need to make sure that there are no airplanes in the vicinity. Obviously, there's a potential conflict of interest with Elon Musk coming into FAA. I think there was a lot of surprise and concern when it was revealed that SpaceX had embedded several employees in FAA to inspect our systems and ultimately recommend that FAA abandon a contract it had already made with Verizon and instead use Starlink satellites. Starlink satellites, of course, being owned by SpaceX. It was very hush-hush. It didn't really go through the kind of typical channels that something like that would. You know, we have a process for determining who gets to do a contract, who's going to do it in the way that best supports our mission, public safety. We don't do this to make things more efficient. We don't do our jobs to make things go faster. We do this to keep people alive. That's the whole mission. So for SpaceX to come in without having to prove that they're going to do it the best, that's actually bad for safety. DOGE is making public services worse, is making the American public less safe, and it frankly is going to cost the American taxpayers more money. DOGE is putting SpaceX into the FAA because Elon Musk owns SpaceX and he wants his company to make more money. DOGE is not eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. DOGE is one of the worst creators of waste, fraud, and abuse in American history. We have Department of Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy saying that there's going to be a reduction in force coming. Employees just do not have confidence that our leadership is going to support them. And I'm certainly not staying for the job security. I'm certainly not staying for the pay. I'm staying because people rely on the FAA to keep us safe when we get on airplanes. Every day when I walk into my office, I put my hand over my heart and I read the federal oath of office. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter. So help me God. When I see some of the decisions that our leadership makes, I wonder how seriously they take their oath.